One of the major challenges faced by most nations engaged in international trade today is the alarming upsurge in illicit trade practices and the resulting adverse impact of the phenomenon on almost all key facets of life in the countries that experience the trend. The defining features of illicit trade are the supply, distribution, and sale of smuggled, counterfeit, and substandard goods on which applicable duties and taxes were not paid upon their entry into the country where they end up being sold to consumers. Such contraband enter end-user countries through either legitimate channels like designated seaports and land borders, or illegal trade routes such as footpaths, bush tracks, creeks and rivers adjoining national boundary areas. Besides the evasion of applicable taxes, another striking feature of illicit trade is that the goods brought in through the practice are not usually subjected to the full scrutiny of extant laws that regulate their sale and consumption in end-user countries. In addition, their branding and packaging are usually done disingenuously to trick and deceive unwary customers into patronizing them, with fake products often bearing the brand names and labels or logos of the original locally manufactured or internationally acclaimed brands that they imitate. In Nigeria, the favorite goods of illicit trade syndicates include pharmaceutical drugs, food items such as poultry products, consumer products such as tobacco, hard liquor, otherwise known as hot drink, as well as exotic drinks like champagne and choice wines. Others considered lucrative are designer wares and fashion accessories like jeans, suits, belts, bags, perfumes, and jewelries. Also on the dubious list are popular creative works and intellectual property like best-selling books of celebrated authors, rave-making waxed tunes of iconic entertainers rendered in record or compact disc medium, and popular home videos and films, particularly box office hits. Some stakeholders now comment on the major factors that encourage illicit trade in Nigeria.
The porosity of the border is one. The compromise on the part of officials of government who are supposed to police the borders is another.
It is like we have Nigerians who want to become rich quick. They have realized that importing fake drugs, fake goods, etc. is nearly as profitable as being in the illegal drug business like heroin, cocaine, etc. But the penalty is ridiculous. It's a slap on your hand. 5,000 naira penalty, not even jail term. Somebody who brings in fake medical drugs, if you don't give him life imprisonment because he's killing people, then he will continue doing it.
Smuggling is a global phenomenon. Human nature will always gravitate towards whatever product is cheaper. So basically the base problem of all smuggling is economics, financial. And when you compound it with outright bans, high tariffs on the part of government, then those who engage in those businesses see an opportunity to bring in the products which don't have to pay those tariffs or which circumvent the bans.
Whether they are nations, corporate bodies, or individuals, the victims of illicit trade practices usually suffer crushing blows. These include loss of huge income arising from non-payment of legitimate duties on smuggled goods and spiraling unemployment resulting from massive job cuts by indigenous manufacturers whose locally made brands can no longer compete with cheaper inferior smuggled goods. Other devastating effects of illicit trade on its victims are a persistent negative bottom line and in many cases bankruptcy which some business organizations exposed to unfair competition from illicit trade practices usually suffer. Collapse of or irreparable damage to property, particularly by those parties that patronize substandard and counterfeit building materials for property development. Tragic loss of lives as well as sustenance of permanent disabilities arising from the consumption of fake pharmaceutical drugs. Other critical fallouts of illicit trade include trauma, which is usually the lot of victims of intellectual property rights abuses and copyright infringements, as many suffer emotional breakdowns and financial ruin when colossal amounts of money and years of hard work invested in creative enterprises such as books publication, production of home videos, the waxing of records which are subsequently made into compact discs, and so on go down the drain, sometimes literally overnight as a result of relentless bootlegging. Indeed, there have been instances when some casualties, particularly performing artists and entertainers, never recover from their ordeals, living the remainder of their lives in deep misery and sometimes abject poverty. As you will now hear, illicit trade is certainly an ill wind that leaves its victims devastated.
If you have this scourge of smuggling that is preventing those in production from thriving, then you compound the problem of unemployment. If you have a situation where products of investors in Nigeria are being faked, in a very brazen manner, brought into the country, sold all over the place, how do you want to encourage industrialization?
I have dozens who have stolen some of my bass lines or hook lines and so on. It is criminal because the artist who spends a lot of time rehearsing his instrument, his voice, producing songs, borrowing money, having partners and friends contributing to do a CD, is being ripped off his benefit. Because if you bootleg a CD means you are killing the artist.
The tobacco industry has generated a lot of debate recently, with the increasing push for stiffer regulation of the manufacture, sale, and distribution of tobacco products. Nigeria is not exempt from this debate, as it is poised to pass into law its own Tobacco Control Act. While many, including the anti-tobacco control lobbying groups and the tobacco industry, are in support of the new law, many have also asked that the law be passed in a form that will not encourage smuggling of the product by criminals and terrorists. Very high on the list of product types that illicit trade rings find exceedingly lucrative are tobacco products. In Nigeria, a 2005 study by the World Health Organization (WHO) estimated that more than 30% of cigarettes smoked in the country is smuggled. Even as a 2012 publication by the World Custom Journal indicated that the value has dropped to less than 10%, the problem of illicit cigarette products still persists in the country. In fact, today, illicit trade in tobacco products is one big scourge that many countries contend with. Take the case of the United States of America, where studies have revealed that up to 60% of the tobacco products consumed in the city of New York is smuggled. In Australia, illicit tobacco accounts for 13.3% of total national sales, while Pakistan contends with a figure of 18.4%. Ireland battles the problem too, as between 13 to 29% of all tobacco products sold in the country enter through illegal channels. The United Kingdom, UK, comprising England, Northern Ireland, Scotland and Wales, does not enjoy immunity from the problem of illicit tobacco products either. Indeed, 10% of independent retailers in the UK were contemplating shutting down due to the serious threat posed to their business by the huge volume of cheap cigarettes that are smuggled into the country. But why is the incidence of illicit trade in tobacco products spiraling? The trend arose in these countries largely through the imposition of measures that tended to push the retail price of tobacco products to very prohibitive levels, whilst also restricting access to them, all with the objective of discouraging smoking uptake, that is, dissuade people from embracing the habit of smoking, while promoting smoking cessation, that is, encourage people to drop the habit of smoking. Take, for example, the case of Pakistan, where the tax on retail price of each packet of cigarettes sold in the country ranges from 68.5% to 81%. The result, no doubt unwanted by the authorities, is that between 2008 and 2013, the sale of smuggled cigarettes, which prices are cheaper, increased by as much as 60% in Pakistan. A similar scenario currently plays out in Ireland, where the high taxes imposed on cigarettes have encouraged smuggling, to the extent that Ireland now ranks an unenviable third in tobacco smuggling among European countries, according to available records. Indeed, a 2013 report in the Financial Times indicated that smuggled cigarettes are as easy to come by as some of the most common consumer products in the country, such as iceberg lettuces and shiny green apples. In Australia, studies have established a correlation between a 25% increase in excise duties on locally produced tobacco products introduced in 2010 and a resulting increase in the demand for cheap, counterfeit and contraband cigarettes. The spiral in the volume of illicit tobacco products that is induced to a large extent by high prices of locally produced brands is a trend that is also prevalent in some African countries. This is peculiar to those African countries where government adopted prohibitive tax on locally produced brands as part of the measures to control tobacco consumption. According to the Tobacco Institute of South Africa, by 2011, illicit trade in tobacco products accounted for 26% of the total volume of cigarettes sold in the country. This trend was attributed to the increase in excise duties imposed on tobacco products on a regular basis, which spiked the prices of locally produced brands and encouraged the smuggling of inferior, cheaper brands. The upsurge experienced in incidents of illicit trade in tobacco products on the continent is not limited to South Africa. Indeed, the prevalence of the tendency in Africa is further reinforced by the experience of Egypt, a leading country in the northern axis of the continent, which is also grappling with the worrisome experience. Due to the rather high prices of locally produced brands and other brands imported into the country through legitimate trade channels and practices, cheaper smuggled brands have invaded Egypt. Whereas most of the legitimate cigarette products marketed in the country sell for between 6 and 25 Egyptian pound per packet, depending on the brand, the smuggled brands sell for as low as 2 to 2.5 Egyptian pound, making illicit cigarettes more popular among smokers in Egypt, particularly those who are cost-conscious in servicing their habit. The West African country of Mali also contends with a similar problem, as illicit cigarette brands constitute around 28 to 38% of total volume of cigarettes sold in the country, a trend attributable to the relatively higher prices of local brands. Spurred by the growing campaign in the international community for strong regulation against the use of tobacco products, and taking cue from the tobacco control agenda of global bodies like the World Health Organization (WHO), Nigeria is set to strengthen her existing tobacco law through a Tobacco Control Bill (TCB), which is currently being considered by the National Assembly. As Nigerians eagerly await the enactment of the new tobacco control law, some observers have opined that it is important that the lawmakers and the National Assembly situate the tobacco control bill within the local context by avoiding the rather simplistic approach of a wholesale adoption of the regulations enacted in other domains. Protagonists of this notion argue that the complete adoption of measures prescribed for other crimes without objectively examining their relevance to the Nigerian context could result in the enactment of a tobacco control law that may not only be unenforceable in Nigeria, but which could also leave both the consumers of tobacco products and the local tobacco industry worse off.
It's laudable that they want to put in a control bill that will regulate the industry. Perfect. I'm fully in support of that. But they should not allow us to fall into the obvious traps that some of these other countries like Ireland and Canada have made for themselves and are now trying to find a way of coming out of. Learn from their mistakes, improve our laws. Let's make our own laws much better, much more focused and much more suited for our Nigerian environment.
You cannot just begin to make laws or copy laws that different countries have made, and you want to come and apply it in your country without first of all examining and evaluating your country as a social organization, as an economic organization. When you pick a copy of the law of any country or bring it back home and look at it line by line, evaluate it and determine which works for your country and which is not likely to work for your country.
There are certainly good reasons for Nigeria to be wary of copying the tobacco control laws in operation in other countries wholesale in enacting her new tobacco control law. The proven regulatory errors committed by countries like Ireland and Canada, for example, have shown that a law that is too stringent will certainly be counterproductive. The strong emphasis placed on price increase by the control laws in these countries was informed largely by the theory advanced by some international anti-tobacco advocacy groups that with significant price hikes achieved through a continuous upward review of excise duties and sales tax, the desired goals of a substantial increase in the levels of smoking cessation among habitual smokers and discouragement of smoking uptake or initiation into smoking by young people experimenting with smoking will be realized. The advocates of this strategy of tobacco control also contend that rather than decline, the revenues accruing to government and local manufacturers from the sale of tobacco products will still rise significantly and probably double. This is based on their reasoning that the effect of reduced demand will be nullified by the extra revenue accruing from each pack sold. Unfortunately, smuggling and the resulting availability of cheaper tobacco products, which consumers in these countries naturally opted for in response to price increases, made a mockery of the theory, thus rendering it impracticable and unrealistic. Since cigarette smoking is a habit that is often difficult to shelve overnight, and smokers will most likely continue to crave for it in as long as the habit persists, illicit trade in cheap, low-quality tobacco products almost always enjoys a boom if tobacco control measures are such that spike the prices of locally produced brands, as the experience of those countries which adopted the price increase approach has shown. The unsavory implication is that should Nigeria decide to toe the same unproductive path, it may well brace up for the unpleasant shock that may be experienced